The history of settlement and development of the inland Pacific Northwest has always been closely tied to the development and expansion of the region's railroads. There is an area of eastern Washington and North Idaho that is called the Palouse. P-A-L-O-U-S-E, Palouse. This area has a distinctive geology of tall rolling hills that are deep, rich, fertile soil, and to the east the region is bordered by tall forests. Early timber barons were eager to harvest those forests to supply timber to the growing region, and rail lines played an important role in shipping the timber to a broader national market. This video is my attempt to briefly show the history of an independent short-line railroad located on the southeastern corner of the Palouse region called the Washington, Idaho, and Montana Railway. The WI&M, often called the WI&M, was one of a few independently chartered and owned short lines of the region. Most other rail lines in the Palouse region were either branch lines of Northern Pacific, Union Pacific, or Great Northern. Milwaukee Road, a later mainline entry to the northwest, also had a few of its own branch lines in the area as well. Located in the southeastern corner of the Palouse region is the city of Palouse, named for the area. Northern Pacific Railway had built a secondary main line south from Spokane, Washington to Lewiston, Idaho. This line, known as the Palouse and Lewiston, or P&L, reached the city of Palouse in 1888. At the time, Weyerhaeuser Company was quickly expanding its timber interests in North Idaho. Weyerhaeuser had hoped that NP would extend a branch line farther east from Palouse to reach their timberlands, however this never came to pass. Weyerhaeuser and several smaller regional timber companies merged interest and started a new company called the Potlatch Lumber Company. Potlatch Lumber set about building a new sawmill east of Palouse in a new company town named after the company, Potlatch, Idaho. In order to serve this new mill and supply the mill with logs from the mountains to the east, Potlatch Lumber chartered a new railroad, naming it the Washington, Idaho, and Montana Railway. The WI&M would help Potlatch Lumber to establish what would be at one time the largest sawmill in the world located in Potlatch. Construction started in Palouse, Washington in 1905, and quickly proceeded east, reaching Potlatch, Idaho in September 1905. Progress east continued for 2 more years, and the line was completed in 1907. All told, the line stretched from Palouse, Washington, passing through Potlatch, Idaho, Deary, Idaho, named for the general manager of Potlatch Lumber, William Deary, and Beauville, Idaho, terminating just north of Beauville in Purdue, Idaho. Although the WI&M had plans to extend to Montana as the name suggested, no mainline construction ever advanced past Purdue. Around the time the WI&M was completed, the Milwaukee Road was pushing its Pacific Northwest main line west. In 1909, Milwaukee started construction of a branch line south from St. Mary's, Idaho to Elk River, Idaho. The Milwaukee used a portion of the WI&M from Purdue to Beauville, and a small interchange yard and a shared depot was constructed in Beauville. 1910 saw the completion of the Elk River branch. From 1910 onward, the WI&M had daily freight and passenger trains, as well as numerous log trains running on the line. Traffic was primarily logs and finished lumber, but grain and livestock also provided substantial traffic as well. Interchange traffic was primarily eastbound to the Northern Pacific and Palouse, with Milwaukee and Beauville being the number 2 interchange partner, and Great Northern and Palouse getting the remainder. Traffic saw swells and declines throughout the 1920s, World War I, the Depression, and World War II. The Depression hit the WI&M hard, as it did with many small short-line railroads. To reduce costs, the WI&M replaced its steam locomotive-powered passenger trains with first a home-built motor car and later a Fairmont-built motor car, affectionately called the Bug. The last passenger run was in February 1955. After that, the WI&M was freight only. In 1950, the WI&M began to dieselize, purchasing an Alco S3. In 1956, the WI&M purchased a second diesel, a used Fairbanks Morris switcher. Steam locomotives were scrapped, with locomotive number 1 being held as a backup locomotive until it was donated to the city of Potlatch in 1961. It remains on display in Potlatch to this day. Potlatch Lumber would later become Potlatch Forest Industries, and after that, Potlatch Corporation. By 1960, PFI's interest in the WI&M was focused solely on finding a buyer for the railroad, preferring to sell the line off to one of the connecting railroads and offering to route a majority of lumber traffic over whatever line purchased the WI&M as an incentive. NP and Great Northern gave some serious consideration to the offer, but were busy with their own merger efforts at the time. Looking to increase traffic on its own lines, Milwaukee stepped up as a buyer. Milwaukee, however, did not purchase the WI&M outright, instead buying the railroad through its real estate subsidiary, the Milwaukee Land Company. Milwaukee Land Company in turn kept the WI&M as a separate company on paper and leased its operations to Milwaukee Road. Milwaukee retained WI&M crews in Potlatch and ran the WI&M as a separate line using Milwaukee locomotives and cabooses, even interchanging traffic between the WI&M and Milwaukee and Beauville. Traffic patterns shifted greatly, with most traffic now going west to Beauville. It was during the Milwaukee years that a new lumber mill was built in Princeton, Idaho, Bennett Lumber. The 1980 Milwaukee bankruptcy signaled a major change for the WI&M. The Milwaukee main line from St. Mary's, Idaho to Plummer, Idaho was purchased by the Potlatch Corporation, as was the branch from St. Mary's to Beauville. It was at this time the short section of the WI&M between Purdue and Beauville was sold to the STMA. Although speculation at the time was that Potlatch Corporation would also purchase the WI&M, that did not happen. Instead, BN purchased the WI&M, eager to gain Potlatch lumber traffic out of St. Mary's by interchanging with the new St. Mary's River Railroad in Beauville. Thus, traffic reversed direction again, with most traffic being westbound for the BN P&L branch in Palouse, and online traffic coming from the mills. BN purchased the WI&M in March 1981, operating the WI&M as a contract operator after the 1980 Milwaukee embargo and before its own purchase. Shortly after BN purchased the WI&M, Potlatch Corporation announced the closure of the mill in Potlatch, Idaho, and by 1983 that closure became permanent, and the mill was torn down. This left Bennett Lumber and a few grain elevators as the only customers on the WI&M, with most traffic being interchanged from the St. Mary's River Railroad. By the early 1990s, the WI&M branch still had the original 70-pound rail that the line had been constructed with. In 1994, a derailment prompted the BN to begin upgrading the rail on the line with 112 and 115-pound rail starting in the curves. 1996 was a very pivotal year for the WI&M. In spring of that year, a large snowfall was hit with warm temperatures and lots of rain, resulting in some of the worst flooding in recorded history in the Palouse region. The WI&M was hit hard, with a large fill between Deary and Beauville getting heavily saturated with rain and slumping down up to 10 feet in places. 1996 was also, of course, the year of the BNSF merger. BNSF was looking to offload its branch lines, and because of this, BNSF halted all rail upgrades, picking up rail that had not yet been installed. The result is that to this day, the WI&M is an odd mix of 115-pound rail and 70-pound rail. BNSF also halted repairs to the washout. By this point, the compromised section of fill had been removed and remaining sections stabilized. No further work was done to repair the fill, and this ended the WI&M as a through route and cut off all interchange traffic out of Beauville. In May 1996, BNSF sold the WI&M and the P&L lines to Watco. Watco was unsuccessful in securing funding to repair the damaged fill, and the WI&M became a branch line from Palouse to Deary. In 1997, a derailment east of Deary caused Watco to embargo service east of Harvard. In 2000, Watco applied for abandonment of the line east of Harvard, and in 2002 removed all rail east of milepost 21. In 2006, Watco sold its lines in eastern Washington state to the Washington State Department of Transportation, or WashDOT. Being a state agency, WashDOT could only purchase the track within its borders, so 3.3 miles of the WI&M from Palouse to the Idaho border was sold to WashDOT, while Watco retained ownership of the remaining 47 miles of track and right-of-way in Idaho. The first operator of the WashDOT P&L lines was named the Washington and Idaho Railway, and they also leased the WI&M from Watco. W&I continued to serve Bennett Lumber, by then the only active customer on the line. W&I also recruited 2 other customers to the line, however these were both short-lived. In 2016, floods damaged bridges along the line. The W&I embargoed service because of disagreements between W&I and Watco over who should fund repairs. Bennett Lumber, or BLPI, funded the repairs out of their own pocket to restore service. However, again in 2018, more flood damage occurred, and in late 2018, W&I suspended service. In 2019, a new operator was chosen for the WashDOT-owned lines, the Spokane, Spangle, and Palouse Railroad. SS&P showed interest in operating the WI&M, but never leased the line from Watco. The WI&M has continued to lie dormant, with BLPI having to truck its product to a site in Clarkston, Washington to reload onto rail cars there. In June 2023, online railfan discussions on Facebook and other forums revealed that BLPI had made a filing with the Surface Transportation Board that it intends to purchase the WI&M within Idaho from Watco and select an operator for the line. While the details of this purchase and the new operator are unknown at this time, I personally await with great excitement the future of the WI&M. Thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. The 2 books that I used as sources for this video are Palouse Rails by Tom Hillebrandt and White Pine Route by Tom Berg. Both of these are excellent books, and I suggest both of those to folks that may be interested in the region's rail history and that of the WI&M. Full disclosure, Tom Hillebrandt and I are good friends, and Tom did publish a number of my photos in his book, albeit under a former name.